different things. So we start, not really dark enough, but never mind. Can we have the lights down a bit more? Down here, please. So we start with this. We saw this yesterday. This is the Nijo Castle, which was the administrative center of the shogunate, the Tokugawa shogunate, which was, thank you, that's fine, which was formed by Tokugawa Ieyasu. You want those off as well? Yeah, okay, switch them off. They want them off, fine. So Tokugawa Ieyasu here was the third of three powerful daimyo, meaning great names, military lords, who fought over the control of Japan, keep going, in 1600 at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. So it was it was the last of the big battles to determine which family clan was going to actually rule and administrate over Japan. And Tokugawa Ieyasu's armies won that particular battle, big bloody battle. And what he did, he set up the Tokugawa, his family clan, Bakufu. Bakufu means field headquarters, and it was the name given to the military administration, which had been in place in Japan since about 1185. And in fact, this military administration went on until 1868. So there was over 700 years of military administration in Japan, which very much flavored the culture in terms of military arts, martial arts, and the type of arts which they enjoyed during this period. So the Bakufu was the administration. It was also called the shogunate, after the shogun, the title of the main daimyo lord, the chief of all chieftains. And it was really a benign administration in this latter part of Japan's history. They still had the emperors. Emperors were still being born and being raised, but they really had no power. The emperor and the imperial palace were based in Kyoto, which was the capital, but Tokugawa Ieyasu developed Edo, which is the present city of Tokyo, was a tiny fishing village. Now, of course, Tokyo is huge, but he is often called the architect of modern Japan, because it was his family which inherited the title of shogun and which ran the administration throughout over 200 years, from the 1600s right up until 1868. So what they did was they presided over a peaceful time in Japan for over 200 years. So is that all right for people? Okay, oh, that's what you want. Okay, good. So the shoguns also, Ieyasu also built next to the imperial palace in Kyoto, the capital, this Nijo palace, which was the administrative center and headquarters in Kyoto for the shogunate. So this was the military household sort of rule. So this is where it is. It's still in Kyoto. It's unfortunately lost its donjon, its tower, but there is huge walls and a moat, bridge over the moat that goes right around it, and one can actually go and visit it. So this was very much still the feudal era of Japan. So I'm giving you the kind of background of Japan as it was when the foreigners came in the 1850s and 60s. So feudal Japan was run by the daimyo lords all through. There was a certain number of clans. There were about 260 of them. Then they were whittled down. But main castle donjon was then the administration point for the whole area. These are the retainers, the samurai retainers, having a meeting here on the outskirts of the main wall. There's a moat going around this one as well. This is from a hand scroll. So the feudal era was still going on at this time in Japan. So here's a very basic map of Honshu. You can see how close it is to Korea, southern Korea, the Tsushima Straits here. It's about 500 miles, not very far. And actually, yeah, about that. And then up here, there's another island called Hokkaido, bit like Scotland, but they kind of ignored it until the 19th century, so they never put it on the maps, in the historical maps. So there is another island, Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu here, and the Ryukyu Islands coming down here. So Kyoto is in the middle there, that's the capital. Edo, or Hokkaido, is, Tokyo is here. And between these two main cities, there was the Hokkaido Highway, which was the Eastern Seaboard Highway, which connected the two cities, the two most important cities for this era. And there was another one going up the mountains called the Kisokaido. And there were other routes which connected Kyoto down here to Hirado and Nagasaki. Nagasaki's here. Now, Nagasaki was important because it was the trading port for connections with Korea and China. And so all foreigners outside of Japan came in through Nagasaki. And it was also the Portuguese, which came in through Nagasaki during the first Portuguese people to get in were about 1543. They got shipwrecked off one of these islands down here and were taken to Nagasaki because that's where foreigners were taken to. And they then, over time, settled. And this is what they call a Namban screen. Namban means southern barbarian. Nam is south. Ban is like a barbarian, because obviously they came from the south. And as they were not Japanese, they were obviously barbarians. So that's the Geisha is another term for us foreigners in Japan, which is a sort of quite insulting, but you know, they use it anyway. So they're not very PC in Japan about lots of things. So this is a screen from the 1600s showing us some of the main streets in Nagasaki here with these Jesuit monks and foreigners. And as I was saying yesterday about the Oriental view being like a lens or a filter for our view to the other, of course the same was applying with the Japanese viewing the foreigners in their land and how exotic they were. So the Jesuits were proselytizing their brand of the Christian faith, and they were very successful at it, in fact too successful, because the shogunate in 1639 decided that enough was enough, and they had far too many of these Christians, and who was the Pope, and was he going to invade? So this caused, you know, quite a few questions. You know, we don't know who you are and what you're likely to do. So they banned them. And this caused the edict called Sakoku Rei, which was the exclusion order for all foreigners, apart from Chinese and Koreans, of course, because they were part of the mainland, apart from the Dutch. Now, the Dutch were not excluded because the Dutch were not selling or promoting religion. The Dutch just wanted trade. And they were allowed, they used to trade with a black ship, kurofune means black ship, like this little woodcut here, and they would trade and come into the harbour at Nagasaki once a year on their round trip of the Spice Islands. Now, this is a map looking south, south is up there, of Nagasaki as it was in the late 1800s. And this little fan-shaped island here is the island of Dejima. Dejima actually means outside island. De is outside, Shima or Jima is island. It was a man-made island, not very big, about 1,000 steps or something from end to end, which had the Dutch concession, the trade concession, which were there. They were confined there. There's a bridge to the mainland here, and once a year they would make a long journey of 3 months to Edo to pay tribute to the shogunal court in Edo, modern-day Tokyo. So they walked the length of the Honshu from west to east once a year. To do this tribute walk, which was compulsory and was expensive and took a lot of time, so that kept them busy. And this is a Dutch lantern that was one of the imports up in Nikko, which is the shrine site for Tokugawa Ieyasu. Now, through this little keyhole, this tiny keyhole of Western trade by the Dutch, various items came in, Western items kind of trickled through. So although the Japanese were in a sense, isolated for all this time, couple of hundred years. There was a trickle of trade and ideas from Europe coming through this Dutch trade concession here. So we have a very nice VOC, Dutch East India Company, and I can never remember the Dutch name. I'm sure you know it very well. Anybody know it? Vrede? Say that again? That's why I don't remember it, yes. Thank you, yes. So this is one of their plates from 1650, beautiful blue and white, made over there, and of course part of the trading of lots of ceramics to and from Europe as well. This is a very nice, from the Nabeshima pottery wares, porcelain pottery for the local daimyo lord in that Kagoshima region, which is the western region. I always think this looks very modern. You wouldn't think it was a 17th century design. It's fresh, modern. It takes its nature, of course, and design from the Chinese style porcelain, which was very, very white background, beautiful. And these clear colours, beautiful and clear, strong colours and strong design. So I think this is a very nice example of that kind of stuff. So we have the Japan, which is isolated. We have the Dutch concession, and then in 1853 we have Commodore Perry, who comes into Edo, not Nagasaki, but Edo Bay, with his gunships, 4 gunships in fact, demanding trade. A lot had happened in the couple of hundred years. Pirates had come and gone. There was the whole whaling fleet that had come out of California that were trading in those waters. People were getting shipwrecked. Pirates needed provisions on their way around the world. And Commodore Perry and Americans said, right, we want to trade with Japan. Now, Japan had not fought any battles for over 200 years, so they kind of threw up their hands and said, okay, we can't fight you. And they did not like being in that position of not being able to defend their country. And in fact, it did the shogunate a lot of harm, the fact that they did not have a military fleet or a military anything much to defend their country against the incursion of foreigners. So they had to agree to trade terms, which were the unequal treaties, because tariffs were imposed on the Japanese by the Americans, and they had to sign a trade treaty. This was done in 1856, a formal trade treaty with the plenipotentiary Townsend, who came in from America to sign these trade treaties, which imposed these tariffs and treaties on Japan. So they had to open up to the West, and they had to open up to trade because they had no defenses. So from that time, 1856 onwards, you're looking at 1856, 58, and then into the 1860s, foreigners came into Japan, specifically Nagasaki, because that was already a foreign concession with the Dutch, but also in Yokohama. Yokohama is just south of Tokyo, just south of Edo. So you had these amazing scenes taking place in the 1860s. This is Gankiro Tea House. Having a great time, lots of nice fans and things on the screen walls behind, very opulent and expensive geisha entertainers. Here's one in a beautiful robe. Look at this robe with chrysanthemums largely all over it. There's another one here. We've got a Chinese chap here dancing around. He might be Dutch. She's an American lady with a kind of Indian headdress, like American Indian headdress. So that's how they depicted Americans. So there are all manner of kind of strange and interesting people in this tea house in Yokohama coming into the 1860s. Very exciting for them. And we have a rather nice little print here by Gunte Sadahide. And this is an English trader. This is A. This is the character, Japanese character for England, A. And he's sorting fabrics. You can see a pile of fabrics there. He's a fabric trader. He's in a sort of Chinese-style chair because, of course, Japanese didn't have chairs. They sat on the floor. So they imported some Chinese chairs. And he's thinking about his wife. This is like a kind of thought bubble in a Japanese way of depicting it. And it's rather sweet that he's sorting through the cloth and thinking about his wife far, far away back in England. So it's a picture within a picture, and this is one of the themes of Japanese imagery. And this one, again, the autumn moon tea house. We've got a foreigner sailor here who's saying, oh, look, you can see the full moon from here. And this, you know, Japanese lady entertainer at the tea house. But I would draw your attention not only to the patterning of this screen, the shoji screen behind, and these roundels of information which occur, but also he's in his socks, because of course you have to take your shoes off. There's a foreign import carpet here. But look at her posture. Now, this is very typical of Japanese female posture. He's tall and straight, you know, as we expect. She's bent, subservient, like this. And this was how they were in front of people of higher status. All right, so you're entertaining a guest at the tea house, so you shrink like this. So this is a very typical posture which you will see often in Japanese prints. By 1908, by the end of that century, the Japanese were importing goods from Europe and from America, particularly Europe. Meiji is the subsequent era after the Edo period. The Edo period is called the Edo period and also Tokugawa period. Tokugawa for the shogunate, but also Edo for the city, the name of the city. So the Edo period was this period. And the subsequent period was the Meiji period from 1868 to 1912, and that was the period of modernization. So a lot of things happened then. But by this time, the Japanese are producing sophisticated images. This is a boat around the harbor, telling us about imports, foreign imports to Japan. And look at the way these ladies, these Japanese ladies, are dressing in Western dress and standing straight, not bent like this, all right? Little children, men chatting, perspective, Western style, right? This is quite a sophisticated image when we see what was normal, which was this, for the Edo period. So this is the traditional type of picture making, of image making in Japan, which was used extensively in the prints, also in the paintings, but we're looking more at the prints in this particular focus. So Haranobu, Suzuki Haranobu was one of the great artists, actually, of depicting genre scenes in this period. And it's also called the pre-modern period, because this was before the modernization and industrialization of Japan, which happened in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s. So this is early Edo, which is a carry through from the traditional pictures and images of Japan. So it's history, it's long history. So we have a tea stall here. There's a samurai warrior there with his two swords, chatting up the pretty girl here. Another one is carrying the water here for the kettle to make the tea. This one by Okumura Toshinobu is showing us three city types. The man here is like a man about, he's a citizen, a man about town citizen he's from Edo, Tokyo. To is the character on his jacket here. The lady in the tea house is from Kyoto here, but he's got his arm wrapped around the boy, it's not a girl, it's a boy, from Osaka, who is here. So he's going off with the boy for an evening's entertainment of whatever. So the boy is just as gaudily dressed as the girl behind him. So this was his choice. Now there's two ways of, or two depictions in Japanese prints. The traditional one is this, which is like a kind of isometric sort of projection where you're looking down on something and everything's flattened onto the same space. There's no sense of perspective, they're all the same size, and there's no kind of ground apart from the shading of this particular print. It's an indoor market, and we can see various people, nice ladies in nice kimono in furisode coming in, gentlemen, chap here having a smoke at the back. They're selling food, she's selling fabrics. You know, it's a nice everyday scene of people at a market going about their business. This is a more sophisticated image from one of the Hiroshige descendants from the main Hiroshige, who we will see a lot of. And it's got this aerial perspective. So we can see immediately that this is large people in the foreground and then going back and back and back to give us this sense of scale and perspective. It's more of a kind of an atmospheric perspective. There's no vanishing point as such, but you get the sense of pictorial space looking backwards, whereas in these you don't. So this is quite nice. Again, it's everyday scenes, ladies hitching up their kimono to put the clams in the baskets, children helping. It's breezy, there's a wind blowing, just like Cape Town. So, you know, it's a nice, familiar scene that we can identify with. But these are the more typical views of people going about, and it's because of these genre scenes that we know in a way so much about Japanese life during this 17th to 19th century. It's because of all the prints, and there were thousands and hundreds of thousands of prints that they made of these kind of genre scenes depicting the lives of people. So these are two ladies entertaining a client in a tea house, and they've got the shoji screen open to reveal a kind of landscape, although that's a very big pool there. It's a very big pond. Looks like snow. I think this is in winter, a depiction of snow. And a reference to another place up here. That's not actually the view. It's like a sort of thought bubble of something else going on, another relationship to another place up here. And this is another little scene by Harunobu with the girl here in a print shop, all these lovely prints behind, selling brushes and paints and all sorts of things. And there's another samurai chatting her up. Maybe it's the same guy going around all the different shops in Edo chatting up the young girls, all right? So they're having a little sort of, and there's a little poem up here that describes what's going on. So it's very sweet. It's a kind of innocence. It's a nice kind of scene. So by the 1850s then, things were hotting up in Edo. Edo was, as I said, a tiny fishing village to begin with. Now it's Tokyo, but in the middle of that, wharves, trade, and particularly because the leisure industries grew through this period, because they were not fighting any battles or wars. So it was a peaceful time. So peaceful productivity. They were a closed country as far as the West was concerned, apart from the Dutch. So things kind of developed naturally in the Japanese way. And so lots of wharves along the Sumida River here. And this is the first of many Hiroshige prints we're going to look at. 1856. He died in 1858, so it's 2 years before he died. A very nice moonlit street. Now this is interesting. There are two aspects here which are not usually in Japanese prints. One is the one-point perspective, and two, the shadows. You never see shadows. So he's making a point of a Western idea of introducing a sharp perspective and also shadows from the moon, the full moon. So this is rather nice. Even the dog has a shadow. You know, it's a rather nice reference to what he saw as a more sophisticated art form. So Japanese prints. And if you remember, the last slide we looked at yesterday was Whistler's The Gold Screen, where the languorous lady in her kimonos is looking at prints, right? And prints is what it's about today. And it was the availability of so many prints for cheap prices that came back into Europe and America. It was one of the first imports, as well as China and pottery, lacquer and other things. But the prints came in, you know, in quantities. And people took them up. And particularly in Paris, we have Siegfried Bing, who had a gallery in Paris, who was focused on the importation of Japanese arts and lacquer, but particularly prints. So he would put out these periodicals, you know, Le Japon Artistique, documents of art and industry and what was going on in Japan, but specifically the artistic stuff, and especially prints, were being imported, and he would then sell them on. This is a very typical one by Utamaro, another great artist in Japan, of the same kind of scene of these decorous ladies. Very nice, very nicely done. So this was beginning to come in. People were beginning to buy them and collect them. This is another one of Bing's publications here. Now, this is a nice portrait of Émile Zola by Edouard Manet, 1868. 1868 is significant because that was the start of the Meiji period, when the new young emperor in Japan, the old one had died off, and the old shogun had died off as well, and that was convenient. So the new young emperor was then taken up by a new group of supporters who moved and he decided, he was only young, but he decided to move the court from Kyoto, the old capital of over 1,000 years, to Edo, make the imperial court at Edo, and rename it Tokyo, Eastern capital. So this is 1868 is the year the capital and the imperial house moved from Kyoto to Edo, to Tokyo, and renamed it Tokyo. So this is a significant year. So it's nice that he was being painted here. Now, Zola has a board up here with Japanese prints, and if you know your Manet, anybody know that painting by Manet? Olympia. N'est-ce pas? Olympia, which is the languorous nude, which was not an odalisque like yesterday. She wasn't exotic, she was a common girl, and she was looking right at you, and people didn't like that at all. They thought it was not good taste. But he's got a print or an engraving of her on the wall here, and look at this. He's got a gold Japanese screen. Look at that. And he's looking at books, and there's all manner of publications here. He's got a china porcelain box here, which could be Chinese or Japanese. So one of these could be something like this that he's looking at as well. And he was a very good supporter of Japanese prints. Now, some of these pictures we've seen yesterday, but that's all right. Whistler, as I said, was one of the early proponents and supporters of things Japanese. Now, this Symphony in White, number 2, not number 1, is the better of the two. Young lady with a Japanese fan, some blossoms, and a blue and white porcelain vase, and a red lacquer Chinese-style bowl here, and looking in the mirror. Now, this is quite an interesting image because, of course, they're beginning to use the props of Japan in the same way that the Orientalists, although we're not supposed to use that word, use the props in the harem of the turban and the bangles and the fans to make it look exotic. Remember, pictures of the other culture, which were acceptable. So here we have the same kind of thing of prop setting here with blue and white china. This is a large lezen vase, which she's looking at. But this is actually a Chinese robe, not a kimono, but it's a Chinese robe. So we're getting the stage set, you know, populated by these Japanese props coming in from Japan in the 1860s onwards, which were coming because of the trade of the Europeans with the newly opened Japan after all this time. So, and what I was showing these as a marker, because we were talking about chinoiserie yesterday and the fact that the grand palaces in Europe had a Chinese room and displayed their porcelain and their silks and everything. But this was in a domestic middle-class setting. So these things were affordable enough to buy for the middle-ranking sort of wealthy people, the up-and-coming professional classes and middle classes who were able to afford, again, the trappings and the stage setting of fans and blue and white vases, and this lovely ukiyo-e, which is the descriptive word for these types of images, as a sort of fan guard here in a nursery, in a domestic setting. This is not a grand palace, it's not the Royal Pavilion in Brighton. This is somebody's house. All right, so we've translated down into this area with these lovely props and items. I love the way that Shakespeare is kind of looking at us, isn't it? It's rather sweet. So Walter Crane was a children's book illustrator, but he did many other things as well, and he has a fine style, And we have a lot of these. So early Japonism was very like and akin to Orientalism in that artists and photographers kind of dressed up the ladies in kimonos. But I have to say, I mean, this one is called Who Am I? So Alfred Stevens, the Japanese Parisian, contra Taut, who am I? Am I Japanese? Am I French? So she's looking wistfully in the mirror in this kimono with a fan, Japanese fan, with a sort of belt tied loosely around the middle, rather like a dressing gown. And this one here from James Tissot, she doesn't look happy at all, does she? I mean, you know, she's naked underneath, and she's, well, is this what you want? You know, sort of put it on like that, very casual and not particularly looking pleased. And even this one here who's been dressed up, she doesn't look pleased either. So I don't know, I mean, it's a bit odd, isn't it, when you look, but the essence was the dressing up in Japanese costume as opposed to Chinese costume or Indian or Turkish, which we were looking at yesterday. So this is, all right, this was how it began. And interestingly, we have this lovely review, the Geisha, with Marie Lloyd, who was the central figure. And in fact, the Geisha, you know the Mikado, of course, but in fact, the Geisha came out before the Mikado, and it was an operetta based on, you know, sort of funny songs that were sort of Japonesque, more like a sort of chinoiserie frippery, you know, sort of not to be taken too seriously. It was entertainment, it was an operetta. Written by Charles Wilmot and Georges Lebrun, and it was extremely popular. They had over 720 performances, which in those days was a huge number. These days, if it's anything under several thousand, they won't bother. But I mean, in those days, this was a lot, and it was very, very popular. And then Gilbert and Sullivan did their own version of the Mikado, which was, you know, their version of a similar thing. So it's very interesting that this was so popular at that time. So, okay, it's called the Geisha, and she's trying to dance rather stiffly. This is what a geisha actually looks like by Kuniyasu. So she's an entertainer, she's a high-class, expensive entertainer, and she's got a shamisen with the plectrum and her different layers of kimono, which you can see the different patterns there, layering a huge long sash, obi sash tied at the back, coming down, lots of kanzashi and combs and pins in her oiled hair, which is always coiffed like this. So this is a very elegant, and look at the posture. It's not straight, it's contorted. And that's how they dance. They dance in this very sort of slow, contorted way. Very difficult and quite painful as well to do. This is a very typical image of a bijin is the technical term for a beautiful lady. Bi meaning beautiful, jin meaning person or lady. So bijin, beauty or beauty, is a technical term for this type of image. And here she is. This is a painting, it's not a print. This is a print, that's a painting. This is a painting on silk that's been mounted on silk like this. It's a hanging scroll. And she's in a gorgeous kimono, which is dyed, yuzen dyed with flowers and flouncing, almost like a catwalk model, sort of displaying this and coquettishly looking over her shoulder. It's a very young, fresh kind of image. And these kind of images of the standing beauty were extremely common in this period, 17th and 19th century. This one in particular, and Anshi was one of the studio of Anshi, who produced and actually churned out many, many of these kind of images, either colored or not colored. The nice one about this is that the pattern on her kimono is actually showing us poem cards of the 36 immortal poets, which was like a canon of poetry from the classical era, and they were all familiar with this poetry. So you actually had a pattern that had been painted or printed, we don't know, on the kimono with the poems, in Japanese of course, with the image of the poet, and it's all over the actual garment. So it's making a reference to the fact that she's educated and can read, right? So it's kind of reinforcing her status as a beautiful lady. And here's a young artist in an equally gorgeous kimono here who is churning out these images. He's a little shop on his own. He's got all his equipment there, the inkstone, and he's painting. There's another one, you know, come back and I'll do a few more for you. He's churning them out and putting them up so anybody can buy them. So, you know, they were very accessible. And also kabuki prints were extremely popular. This is in Edo, Tokyo, because there is a view here of Mount Fuji in the background. Supposedly you can sometimes see it from the city of Edo when there's not too much pollution. So that's a kind of symbolic view. This is the kabuki street where the theatre is crowded, crammed with people, still going on, still very popular. But kabuki prints were also popular. So artists like Sharaku, who was working in the 1700s for only a very short period of time, produced these evocative and strong images of some of the actors. And in kabuki, all the roles are taken by men, so they're all male actors, either acting as male or female roles. But he had a particular style, which is this, and they were all very similar to this, but depicting different actors. Very strong, almost like a cartoon, almost like a manga. And they've been called manga jin. They're very evocative of that Japanese bold style and kind of expressive style. This is another beautiful one by Kunisada, showing us the actor preparing himself for his role and applying his kesho, his makeup, before he goes on stage. There's the wig up there that he's going to wear. A beautiful lacquered mirror, probably an import, or maybe made in Japan. Brushes down here, inkstone there for the ink that he's doing his brows with. So a very intimate portrait of him. I showed you this yesterday also to show you partly the imperial palace in Kyoto and the ladies of the court. This is their long black hair coming down the back. They didn't wear it up in those days. They wore it long and oiled right down to the ground. So this was their style. The interior of these apartments with sliding screens called fuzuma were painted on both sides with beautiful landscapes. But this time I want you to look at it in a different way. Look at the pattern. Look at the geometry of it. And this is this isometric view where it flattens out the space and gives you these strong diagonals. So it's as if the roof has been taken off and you're looking down onto something. And look at this kind of geometric graphic shapes, all here, all lines, and then these sort of flowing lines inside of this. So this is the traditional style of painting that came from China. They had the same thing, and it was then transferred across Korea and into Japan as well. So this was the traditional way of depicting a scene like this. And we had the screens in the Nizhou Palace, which were gold. Look, you can see the gold leaf, all the different gold leaves up here in the background with tigers, a civet cat here and here with peonies. There were also different formats for painting. There were the kind of panoramic screens that you had in the apartments like that, and the fuzuma screens which you could open. That's the hand pull here to pull it across, and here you open the screens like this. So this was a sort of landscape or horizontal type format, and this was called a hashira-e. This is the long format, very narrow. And this is a wonderful painting by Maruyama Okyo of a tiger. And he did a whole series of these tigers. It's almost like they're coming through a narrow door at you, looking at. They look like cats, but they don't have tigers in Japan. So they don't know what they actually look like. So they look like large cats. But he ended up with an even narrower band with just two eyes looking at you through this very narrow vertical format. So this is some of the things that you'll see later on. Gold was everywhere in the early Edo period in the 1600s, a very famous gold screen by Ogata Korin, white and red plum trees with this wonderful pattern, abstract pattern for water in the middle. Very beautiful. And then, of course, the lacquer work was equally beautiful with gold, makea, and inlay mother of pearls, pearl for these flowers here, and a pewter inlaid moon up there. So all this was very lavish and very beautiful, which brings us to this again, this image of Whistler with the gold screen, the name of the title of the painting here in the background, Chinese chair, kimonos and sashes, and this very ornate gold frame with Japanese motifs on it. And all this is tooled. It's like little spirals. It's almost like leather work, you know, when you do that tooling. It's very ornate, very heavy, very beautiful, to echo the gold in the screen back here, opulence. This is the opulence. And she's looking at Japanese prints, probably by Hiroshige. We'll see why they look like Hiroshige later on. And blue and white pot porcelain down there. So the pictorial space of Japan, the way the Japanese used to depict space and images was very different to the way the West would do it. So these are two good examples. This is Shunsho, who is a wonderful artist. This is a painting, not a print, of a very elegant, high-class lady, a poetess. Why? Because she's got books and brushes, a hand scroll here, papers, a Suzuri here, which is the inkstone to make your ink to write or paint. And she's contemplating the moon in autumn, maples, right? And it's evening because there's a sort of taper lamp here, obviously, because the moon is out. So she's looking up there for inspiration at the moon. So this harks back to the Heian period, the classical period, where the ladies of the court of the Heian court were the poetesses of that time. They were highly regarded, highly educated, and wrote beautiful poetry. It's a whole other genre of things we could talk about. And this is an image from this is about 1820s. This is an image from the 1600s of one of those classical poets from the 12th century. So you have the poetry up here in the script, and you have a hanging screen here, a fabric screen, and she's here. That's her face, those are her eyebrows. She's kind of peeking. She's peeking out from, from behind the screen. So it's a very unusual image, and it shows you the division of pictorial space, which is very different to what we had in the West at that time. So this is probably 17th century. It's a modern version of an older image, but it's still very classical. And a Japanese would read that immediately to read the poem and think, oh yes, that's one of the 36 immortal poets, one of the 100 poets, you know, they're all famous, a bit like Shakespeare. So they would read that immediately and understand what it was. For us, it's almost like an abstract piece of work. It's so strange. So, moving on, we've got this kind of star with the flowing, beautiful lines, little cat, beautiful face, nothing in the background, just blank background, empty space, image on the empty space. And then we have this. So this is still the dressing up phase of Japonism. So early on, Monet puts his wife into a kimono, one of these in, but look at all the fans everywhere, and she's made to look like a dancing lady entertainer in Japan. She's got a red kimono, La Japonaise, 1880. I mean, it's sweet, it's fine, she's lovely, she's blonde, you know, she doesn't look like a Japanese at all. The odd thing is the pattern on the kimono, which has caused much debate, and I don't really get into these debates, but they say it's a very odd image of a samurai warrior with his sword and his strong muscular arm down here, and he's supposed to be killing something down here we can't quite see, and it's got embroidered leaves and plants up here. So people have been wondering about this rather strange image. However, it's a padded kimono, it's like an uchikake, it's like a wedding gown, it's got a big padded base here, but it's a charming image, is it not? And takes its form from something like this, which is a dancer called Sen, so the name is written on her sleeve here, and she's performing a nice dance. So early depictions taking these Japanese forms were very much like chinoiserie. They were not meant to be serious. They were dressing up girls in kimonos, poster from 1907, dainty little ladies from scholastic troubles free, each little bit afraid is wondering what the world can be. It's a bit like Three Little Maids Are We, isn't it, in the Gilbert and Sullivan thing? You know, it's all sweet and cute, and that's exactly what this is. It's carefree and it's very pretty. This is another exhibition transport poster from 1910, rather stiff and starchy, not much grace about it at all. Ladies put into Japanese clothes with Mount Fuji in the background, but not, it's a kind of very flat depiction. It's not particularly interesting, it's just of its time. The real art was done by, the real beauties came from Utamaro, 1753 to 1806, and he was the one who really depicted, he held the corner for the bijin, the category of bijin, the beauties. So it didn't matter what they were doing, sewing or mending or going out for a walk or chatting, they all seemed to look exactly the same. There are differences in the facial features, but they're quite subtle. But this is the form. This is the form of beauty which was acceptable, the three-quarter view, this way or that way, not straight on and not profile. So three-quarter view every time. That is the acceptable face of a beauty. So here she is threading a needle. This is just to make the point, right? She's just mended this very fine gauze cloth, which she's holding up to look. All that is a woodblock print. So all that has to be cut on the block. And there's lots and lots of detail in these prints, which all have to be carved. And actually, to carve something like that takes a great deal of skill. Right, that's just a minor point. So images like this from Utamaro, there's the three quarters, three quarters, three quarters, three quarters. It's always, and this is the looking back. In all the prints we've seen, they're looking back at each other. It's the mikairi. Mikairi means looking back. So because it's pretty and it's effective. So here we are, Osome and Hisamatsu, the lovers, communicating behind Grandpa's back as he tries to read a letter. And look what he's got, an import from Dejima, an import from the Dutch, spectacles. Interesting. This one I show because it is very typical of the print format, in that we have a beauty, sometimes with a cat or not, but all the information about this series is in the cartouches. They use the French term cartouche, or the sort of information boxes. There's a picture within a picture talking about another part of this series, and the informational seals of the publishers, the artist, that's a publisher seal, and there are date seals, that's number 7 in the series. They also have to be sealed for the censors, censor seals, they have to be passed by the censors. So there's all kinds of bits of information all around the print in terms of the information about what it is, who it is, what the series is, who made it, who the publisher is, and their dating system. So all that is on the face of the print, right? Now, when we make a picture in the West, we don't like to write on it, do we? Well, we didn't then, but we do now. So, bijin with a fan, eisho. This is the format, the three-quarter view, filling the frame. It's a big image, a cut-off image. And we can see it in Toulouse-Lautrec's, Marcel, and A Jeune Fille by Picasso, a very unusual Picasso. It's one of his very few impressionist paintings. He didn't do many. He moved on after that. But look at the format, the head, the shoulders, filling that space. He's even put a hand-drawn line around it. And of course, Toulouse-Lautrec made his own his own signature in the form of a cartouche on a Japanese print. He made that, that was his symbol. Also, Whistler chose the, not the butterfly, what did he have? He had a sort of little butterfly, grasshopper, what was it? He used something for his own seal on his images. We'll see that a bit later on. So this, I think, is very indicative of the kind of formats that were being used and seen by artists in the West. Particularly Hiroshige, his wonderful carp streamer, taking up the forefront of the picture right in front of us. And this bass player here in, again, Toulouse-Lautrec's Jeune Avril. So we've got something right in front of us and then looking through into something behind. Very unusual viewpoint. We didn't see that before in Western art. And another Hiroshige with an open shoji screen here looking through into the view. This shape is quite extraordinary as the main shape and design of the image. Very unusual. So as we go on, poster art becomes extremely popular. And this is taken from the flat color, the bold lines, the black outlines, the simplification from Japanese prints, particularly by the French artists and particularly by Toulouse-Lautrec and others. So he creates Aristide Bruand in his cabaret. There's a chap actually looking at the same poster for Le Mirliton. These were all cabaret shows in Paris that took on, there's this little symbol there, Toulouse-Lautrec down here, which he made look like a Japanese stamp, right? So make it look Japanese, even more Japanese, flat color, bold black and red. And I'm contrasting these two to show how things had moved on in the space of really less than 20 years. So 1870s, quite an interesting, although conservative artist, Emma Sands, 1870, with a young lady with a gold screen in the background, gold Japanese screen. But look how the whole iconography has changed and flattened and simplified and become bolder in the space of, what's this, 1880s? I mean, 1890s. This is a very short time to adopt a whole new way of seeing things and a whole new way of graphic design, plus the writing on it, like a poster, like in the Japanese, all their different bits of writing and information. So I think to contrast these two is quite interesting in terms of the color, the flatness, the line, the composition, everything. They had moved on a lot in this short space. Paris also embraced the whole culture of Japonisierie in the same way that the West embraced the harem in Orientalism and the wild abandon of these ladies. So here we have a cabaret, concert, brasserie, déjeuner, dîner, souper. You know, they're open all day, basically. You can go there at any time of the day or evening and get a meal and be entertained by lascivious ladies, gay abandon, just like the ones we've seen in the harem there, painted by the French chap. So, you know, this was all going on. It was wild, and it was service japonaise, exotic, other culture. You know, this is what people wanted, the exoticism of this wonderful geisha, who's not really a geisha, just dressed up in a kimono. But, you know, all this going on is quite wonderful. But this was what it was depicted in Japan. So the print shop with the decorous ladies, and this decorous lady looking at prints and also thinking about another place up here, picture within a picture. All right, so as Whistler had his lady looking at prints, here we have the same kind of imagery. Hiroshige was one of the most influential artists because of the prints he made. There were lots of very excellent Japanese artists, but Hiroshige was the one that everybody responded to in terms of landscape and style. And he was hugely prolific, as was Hokusai. This is a posthumous image of him as a Buddhist monk, which was quite the normal way to depict people of stature in those days. He's got a rosary, Buddhist beads, shaved his head. And so his images and prints, particularly of the city of Edo, this is a Saxa, one of the main gates to the temple there, and his paintings of people and rain and bridges. Now, particularly, we know that Monet collected Japanese prints, and Vincent van Gogh, and many of the others, Degas, all the Impressionists collected Japanese prints madly. But it was really Van Gogh who really tried to understand what was going on and how to make that kind of picture. So he does these copies from Hiroshige in this way to try and get the space, to try and understand what was going on and how this pictorial space was being organized. And the only way to do that is to copy as closely as you can. So here we have the Plum Grove by Hiroshige, and this is Van Gogh's version of it, to try to get those shapes, to try to see the negative space and what's going on, and because it's so different, it's so alien. And he puts in a bit of strange writing, which doesn't make any sense at all, but it's all for the effect. So here he's copying another artist with an oiran, who's a high-class courtesan here with all the pins in her hair. There's another painting underneath of cranes and waters and water lilies and bamboo. And this is the frame for that picture of the bridge in the rain. It's almost too much, it's over the top. But he's experimenting, he wants to understand. So his very famous portrait of Père Tanguy here, with all the pictures, there's that oiran again, there's other paintings in the background, Mount Fuji right above his head. You know, he's blending, he's putting it all together, he's getting obsessed with Japanese prints. And here he does a painting of himself as a Buddhist monk. It's called as bonze, which means he's shaved his head. And he's looking very intently at himself, trying to understand this strange and beautiful stuff that he's looking at. I like this analogy here with Harima Beach by Hiroshige, with the pine trees and the olive grove by Van Gogh. You can almost feel that energy transferring across into the pine trees, can't you? He's got that kind of frisson, that energy, how to make that happen. I think that's very indicative. Now, other things about traditional Japanese art was the flat colour and the flat background. These are more of these poem cards with famous poets from the classical canon. And this is part of a screen of dancers on this flat background. And he also used that. You know, this is Hiroshige, two famous portraits that Van Gogh did with this bold, bright, flat background. Nobody had done that before. It really was quite shocking. It's a very strong colour. L'Arlésienne is really sort of post-impressionist because of its very bold structure, contrasting light and dark, and this quite extraordinary colour in the background. Would never have used it before. So his self-portrait, and he wrote, as you know, he wrote a lot all the time to his brother Theo, who was trying to sell his work. And, you know, he wrote a lot about what he thought about art and how he was trying to express it. And he wrote interestingly about Japanese art. He said, "I envy the Japanese for their enormous clarity that pervades their work." He said, "Even the most vulgar Japanese sheets, prints," I can't read that, "even the most vulgar Japanese sheets coloured in flat tones are as admirable as Rubens or Veronese. In a way, all my work is founded on Japanese art." But he's talking about his later work, of course, not the early work. So he was really influenced. He really got obsessed. He really got it into himself and was trying to emulate that. Also, Émile Zola noted their strange elegance and splendid colour patches of the prints, of the paintings. Camille Pissarro said, "These Japanese confirm my belief in our vision." And he called Hiroshige a marvelous impressionist. What an accolade that was. A foreigner, a foreign artist, one of them. He could see and understand what he was painting. I mean, that is really marvelous. And then again, another European art critic writing on the composition of Japanese prints said it was a dangerous dismantling of nature. Yes, because it wasn't realistic. It wasn't like Renaissance art. It was completely dismantling nature. That was a good thing. And Émile Orlil, who was a collector of Japanese prints, said, "Japanese painters have devised subtle and complex methods of creating interplay between picture surface and pictorial space." That's quite intellectual. But he's talking about the way they organize space and the way that they create, should I put that back? It's a bit bright, isn't it? The way they create pictorial space. And I think we see it very clearly in these images, Hiroshige of the High Bridge, and of course Whistler's Nocturne, Old Battersea Bridge, 1872, with the boat at a strange angle here. You know, people didn't make images like this before this time. They didn't see the high perspective, the high horizons. And when we see Hokusai, one of the great artists of this period, for his compositional elements with this high bridge as an album plate, 7 bridges with Mount Fuji over there, all sorts of bridges in this wonderful image here. And his drawing was superb, his draftsmanship was superb. And then if we look at this, you see how that is affecting how we look at something, the high view, looking at things underneath here. And this Manen Bashi in Edo by Hokusai. And then we see this, look at the bridge. It's the same kind of bridge that Monet used in his garden at Giverny. And you're looking underneath the bridge. This was very unusual. You really don't see this kind of compositional space before this time. Whistler again, Thames at Battersea. What's going on here? Nothing. He had the confidence to make the central space empty with a high horizon. And this kuniyoshi is a very famous image of nobles looking at the maple leaves on this river. So the central space is empty. That is so unusual. You have to fill the central space with something. It has to have a subject. But no, you leave it empty because this is a different way of looking at the world. And Hokusai's famous and beautiful series on Mount Fuji, which was a seminal series, making the one object the center of focus here. And he does it beautifully in this series of prints from the first series of the 36 views of Mount Fuji, 1831 to 32. And these are seminal images which you don't see. Now, I'm not saying that